We are recording this meeting, and it will be posted tomorrow on BAM's YouTube channel. And following the meeting, we'll send out a copy of the slides for this meeting, as well as the link to the recording. I would ask everybody to mute their phones so we can optimize audio quality. We're also running the closed captions for those of you who would prefer to read along or have some hearing difficulties. So click on that if you need to see the closed captions. Pamela's very interested in hearing questions from us. So please feel free throughout her initial remarks to enter the questions and your comments in the chat box. We'll have a facilitated question and answer. You'll also be able to just raise your hand if you'd like. Okay, I'll hand it over right now to Nancy Statz. Dr. Statz helps with the program planning at BAM, and to introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you so much, Carol. It is such an honor for me to introduce Pamela Burch Fort. I first saw her, although she's been around quite a while, and that's on me, but we were at the League of Women Voters in Tallahassee, and she got up and spoke, and what a force. She is one of those rather small but mighty women, not unlike our mayor and some of the folks on this in this group. So I'm just delighted that she's spending her Wednesday evening with us. She is president of what's called the Commerce Group, which is a legislative affairs and political law consulting practice. And I have to brag a little that in January, if I read my numbers correctly, it will be 30 years that she has headed up this particular firm, which is pretty phenomenal in and of itself. Prior to that, she worked for 16 years in the Florida Senate as a legislative analyst and as staff director to the Committee on Commerce and the Committee on Banking and Insurance. In addition to her current representation of clients, she with interest before the legislature, including the ACLU of Florida, Florida NAACP, Common Cause Florida, Penn America, the Florida Bar, and several personal injury law firms. She has managed and consulted many candidates and campaigns over several decades, including Wayne Hogan for Congress, Nat Glover for mayor, John McDaniel for the Florida House, Kendrick Meek for Florida, Audrey Gibson for Senate, Dwight Bullard for Florida Senate, Frederica Wilson for Congress, the Fair Districts Initiative, Reggie Fullwood for the Florida House, Leslie Jean Bart for Florida House, Camilla Brown for Florida House, Randolph Bracey for Florida Senate, Tracy Davis for Florida House, Paul Wright for Florida House, Mia Jones for tax collector, Sean Shaw for attorney general, and Charlie Crist for governor most recently. She holds a bachelor's degree and law degree from Florida State University. So you Gators, hush. But welcome to BAM and to Indivisible Mandarin. We are so delighted to have you, Pamela. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Thank you so much, Carol, for inviting me to participate with you all this evening. I'm just very delighted to be here. I have written and rewritten and reorganized my comments, so I hope that they are inspiring to you, and I really look forward to answering any questions that you may have. If you hear me use the we, I'm talking the collective we. Many of my clients, as you can see, really combine and work on many of the same bills. So rather than I use we quite a bit. Before we get started, I think one of the first things I'd like to do is to make sure you understand the playing field. After the 2022 election, the GOP holds supermajority status in both chambers of the legislature, the House and the Senate. While we've seen supermajority status in one chamber or the other, it is the first time there has been a Republican supermajority in both chambers simultaneously since Democrat control of the legislature ended in 1992. What is that supermajority? In the Florida House, there are 120 members. 84 of those members are Republican, and 36 of those members are Democrats. In the Florida Senate, there are 40 senators. 28 of those senators are Republican, and 12 of them are Democrats. In addition, the entire supporting cast is Republican. Every statewide office holder is a Republican. The Attorney General of Florida, the Chief Financial Officer of Florida, the Commissioner of Agriculture of Florida, and of course, the governor. Both United States senators are Republicans. All of the Supreme Court justices are Republican, with one considered a moderate. So if you get the picture, the Florida legislature can do whatever it wants to do, whenever it wants to do it. What's more troubling about this supermajority is that the Democrats are unable to stop a roll of certain procedures. With unanimous consent, any bill can move to third reading or final vote in either chamber. That in and of itself is not unusual. But what is problematic is that there are not enough Democrats or thoughtful Republicans to prevent proposed constitutional amendments from going on the ballot. There have been several amendments proposed for the ballot under the DeSantis administration. While many of them we may not like, I wouldn't say that they were terribly detrimental. But it was more concerning recently when we began hearing that the legislature would convene in special session to add amendments on the ballot to counter or confuse Amendment 3 relating to the legalization of marijuana and Amendment 4 limiting government interference with abortion, both amendments placed on the ballot by citizens' initiative. We had no ability to stop a roll of such language because it takes 3/5 of each chamber to halt such an effort. And with 12 members in the Senate and only 36 in the House, it would have been impossible to stop such an effort. Fortunately for us, no special session was called. Despite the supermajority, it's my job to get the legislature to do what we, the people, want. And that is a challenging to impossible task. What we've seen under the DeSantis administration is the legislature following the governor down the yellow brick road. The governor has entered so much power in the appointment process, particularly placing members on the judicial nominating councils who choose the judges that support the governor's programs. Doing what the governor wants can be lucrative. That's evident in some of the appointments he's already made. Just think university and college presidents. And the governor holds a powerful veto pen. So with the power of the executive office and the supermajority in the legislature, there's no room for bipartisanship. So let's talk about this session. Florida legislators returned to Tallahassee for the 2024 legislative session, and they still appeared incapable of addressing real issues that matter to people. Instead of focusing on lowering property insurance rates, creating more affordable housing, and expanding Medicaid, lawmakers wanted to ban pride flags in public buildings, protect Confederate monuments, and obsess over pronouns people use in private workspaces. Fortunately, these measures did not pass. Once again, the majority legislature was focused on suppressing our access to the ballot box and other measures that make free and fair elections more difficult to attain. We pushed back against Senate Bill 1752, an omnibus measure that would prohibit most voters from using vote-by-mail ballots unless you're out of the country, ill, or physically disabled. And if you happen to be physically disabled, you had to have a note from the physician documenting that disability. Supervisors of elections call this measure unnecessary and foolish. Fortunately, it did not pass. We opposed Senate Bill 190, a measure requiring a law enforcement officer to supervise all ballot boxes at all times. Now, this would mean a uniformed officer would be inside polling places during active voting. Does the word intimidation come to mind? Generally, the only time we see uniformed officers at a polling place is when they are escorting mail ballots along with the SOE staff from a post office to the main SOE office. But we don't need law enforcement officers in our polling places. Fortunately, this bill did not pass. And Senate Bill 359, requiring counties to hand count ballots. Think Miami-Dade, Broward, West Palm Beach. We know that this is delaying election results and opening the system to great potential for human error, whether intentional or not. We continued our fight to protect direct democracy. After all, it is the people's government. We opposed House Joint Resolution 335 that proposed to raise the threshold for approving citizens' initiatives to the Florida Constitution from 60% needed to pass an initiative to 66 and 67%. I don't know why the 67%. We fought off this provision 7 times before. Representative Rick Ross has filed this bill for 7 consecutive years, and it was heard each year. Fortunately, Representative Roth is now term limited, so maybe we won't see this measure again. Other election measures that did not make it across the finish line include House Bill 57 that sought to impose term limits on county commissioners, Senate Bill 562 protecting election workers from harassment by setting penalties for those who intimidate, threaten, or harass workers, including poll workers, county canvassing board members, or SOE county office workers. This bill we worked hard for. Regrettably, it did not get across the finish line. Senate Bill 782 attempted to modify the composition of the county election boards. This too did not pass. What did pass was House Bill 919 relating to political advertisements and artificial intelligence. This measure required a disclaimer on political ads stating that the ad was created with the use of artificial intelligence. Failure to include the disclaimer can result in criminal penalties. Regrettably, there was no requirement that the ad be removed from circulation. A couple more measures I need to highlight in this election's political realm include several congressional resolutions aimed at imposing an Article 5 Constitution Convention, pushed by conservatives for the purpose of rewriting the United States Constitution. Now, for several years, conservatives have pushed to convene a constitutional convention as provided for in Article 5 of the United States Constitution. There are no provisions for how such a convention would be run, how delegates would be elected, what the vote would be in such a convention, what would happen in this convention, who would be there. It takes 38 states to agree to convene such a convention. There has never been but one constitutional convention, and it is the one that led to the creation of the Constitution that we have today. The legislature, however, passed 2 resolutions indicating their support for such a convention. They passed House Bill 703, requiring a balanced federal budget, and House Bill 7057, requiring or authorizing line item veto by the president. Also problematic was the passage of a resolution placed on the ballot to eliminate public campaign financing. Florida citizens enshrined in our Constitution in 1998 the ability to publicly finance campaigns. They reaffirmed this position again in 2010. That's not enough for this legislature. They want to put it back on the ballot again. We are going to need to work really hard to convince the public of the benefit of public financing. Otherwise, only the very wealthy and those with corporate backing would have the financial resources to run for statewide office. Then there was Senate Bill 7014 on ethics. This measure requires that an individual have personal knowledge of a particular ethics violation. No third-party acknowledgement, such as a thorough, well-researched news article, will be permitted as the basis to file an ethics claim. And we know none of us are with politicians when they decide to engage in unethical behavior. We usually get that information from well-written, thoroughly researched news articles. There was some exciting news, though. The Florida NAACP joined the Southern Poverty Law Center, ACLU Florida, Florida Rising, Equal Ground, and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund to develop a state Voting Rights Act. We spent an entire summer researching and looking at other acts in mostly blue states that were created primarily because of the erosion of the federal Voting Rights Act by the U.S. Supreme Court. Filing this bill in Florida made us the first red state to push a state-based Voting Rights Act. This act is known as the Harry T. and Harriet V. Moore Voting Rights Act. Senate Bill 1522 and House Bill 1035 were filed by Senator Geraldine Thompson and Representative LaVon Bracy Davis, both out of the Orlando area. This bill honors and builds upon the hard work and heroic efforts of the Moores to empower Black voters to participate in the political process. The Moores were very active in advancing voting rights by registering Black voters. They are known for registering over 116,000 voters. Needless to say, they were not beloved by all during this time. They were both public school teachers who were eventually fired from their jobs for their community activism. The Moores later involved themselves in what is known as the Groveland 4 case, where 4 Black men were wrongfully accused of raping a white woman. The Moores led the effort to overturn the convictions and death sentences that eventually led to a new trial. In 1951, on Christmas Day, after celebrating their wedding anniversary, the Moores were brutally murdered in their home when a bomb placed under their home by the KKK exploded. This bill is because of them. The Florida Voting Rights Act repeals many of the recent suppressive voting laws enacted by the legislature and proposes measures that enhance and ensure a safe voting environment for all. Key elements of this act include developing provisions that confront vote suppression and vote dilution, launching a pre-clearance program administered by a newly created independent Florida Voting Rights Commission, expanding language assistance for voters with limited English proficiency so every voter can participate in the process, eliminating and implementing a central public repository for election and demographic data with the goal of fostering transparent, evidence-based practice in election administration. Right now, there's so much information and data that's collected and stored in so many different places. The supervisors of elections have data, university research centers have election data, and it's virtually impossible for the public to follow what's really happening. And I think some of that impacts the skepticism around fair and free elections. So we proposed in this bill one repository for data that is accessible to the public. The bill also establishes a paid holiday for Election Day. It creates and implements same-day voter registration and develops automatic voter registration through the Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles. So you're automatically in, and then you have to opt out if you don't want to be automatically in. The bill also protects returning citizens from unfair prosecutions by creating a centralized database for returning citizens to determine their eligibility. Now, we were not really delusional when we proposed this bill. We had no real expectation that the legislature would agenda and hear it. And of course, they didn't. But it is a powerful tool to educate the public on the need to vote. And of course, we have every right to ask for what we want to see in election administration. Senator Thompson and Representative Bracy Davis have promised to continue to file this bill until it is heard by the legislature. We protected our children and our public education system. As the use of universal vouchers has increased, we must ensure that public funds are used responsibly and transparently, and that our public education system is still funded. We spent a lot of time following the education budget process, and if any of you have ever done that, you know how frightening that is. Reported just this week in the Washington Post, and I quote, "In Florida, several programs combine to make every student in the state eligible for vouchers, with more than 400,000 participating this year. At least 82% of students attend religious schools," the Post found. Florida is first in the nation in both the number of enrolled students and the total cost of the voucher program. More than $3 billion this year. Be ready to see that number creep up in years to come. We also did everything we could to keep the restaurant industry from using our youth to save themselves. In the past, unions fought hard to pass child labor laws to reduce the number of hours our teens work, to provide a better opportunity for them to work and attend school. We fought hard against House Bill 49 and ended up making a bad bill better. House Bill 49 now allows minors and those minors 15 and under to work until 7 p.m. on school nights. It allows 16 and 17-year-olds to work until 11 p.m. on school nights and up to 30 hours a week during the school year. It mandates breaks for minors working 4 consecutive hours. Now, these hours don't apply to homeschool students, and there are exemptions for virtual school students and exemptions for hardships. Now, with those hours I just outlined, you had to say, well, Pamela, how is that? How is that a good bill? Well, as I indicated, we made a bad bill better. When the bill was initially filed, anyone 17 and under could work till 11 p.m. on school nights, and everybody could work up to 30 hours a week during the school year. So we were able to get some modifications in to help our students. Gun safety is paramount to keeping our community safe. House Bill 279 banned assault weapons, yet this bill was not heard in the legislature. We also supported Senate Bill 130, which banned guns from libraries, nursing homes, houses of worship, zoos, public transportation, drug treatment centers, and other sensitive locations. This bill was not heard. And please remember, we have permitless carry now in the state of Florida. We also opposed House Bill 17 that reduced the wait time for gun purchases. Fortunately, that bill did not pass either. You know that our democracy is quickly slipping away. Every day I get the feeling we're rapidly moving toward a police state. Remember the election police? Remember the state guard and the extensive authority they carry? Well, take a look at House Bill 747. This bill created a voluntary, auxiliary, unpaid law enforcement unit with statewide authority. Fortunately, this bill did not pass. Senate Bill 1092 increased penalties for crimes against law enforcement officers. We screamed loud enough for people to realize we already have penalties for crimes against law enforcement officers. And then there's House Bill 601. With all of this community policing going on, the legislature passed a measure banning local governments from creating law enforcement citizen review boards. That was very problematic. After House Bill 601 passed, however, the ACLU did further analyses of the act and sent a memo to the 23 cities and counties across the state currently with citizen review boards, urging them to continue the important work of their police review boards. Some analyses and the legislature itself claim that the bill they passed effectively bans police review boards. The ACLU analysis, however, actually shows that the new law has practically no effect on existing citizen review panels. The legislation applies only to panels created by ordinance, not those that community groups created through a charter amendment or the authority of government officials such as sheriffs or mayors. Then there's Senate Bill 184, a measure that makes it unlawful for an individual to approach or remain within 25 feet of a law enforcement officer, a corrections officer, or a first responder after receiving a warning. Now, this bill is known as the Halo Bill because it creates this 25-foot halo around police activity. And what we found when we read this bill and when we had these critical discussions in committee is that this bill has the effect of preventing bystanders from having the ability to film and observe police actions. Violations can result in a misdemeanor. So this act basically leads to criminalizing observation. The 2024 session also saw more of an attack on First Amendment freedoms. You already know that there has been a steady erosion of public records laws. So we know less about how our public funds are spent. We don't even know where the governor travels to because his travel records and his expenditures are exempt from public records. This session saw legislation that impacts a parent's ability to decide whether their children could have access to social media platforms. Now, we acknowledge that there are indeed harmful events and activities online, but we also have to acknowledge that there are benefits for children, particularly marginalized children in certain communities, including LGBTQ teens. And much of the access issues could be resolved through improved parental control measures rather than outright banning children from platforms. HB 1 was enacted as amended to deny online accounts to minors under the age of 16 without verified parental consent and age verification. It also requires social media sites distributing pornography to implement age verification for every and anyone attempting to gain access to those sites to prevent access to minors. Social media platforms can be fined up to $50,000 per violation. For the second year in a row, we fought off a defamation bill that would have voided well-settled defamation law, putting journalists and everyday citizens at risk for merely posting information relying on anonymous sources. Then there was the very problematic bill, HB 651, civil liability for the wrongful death of an unborn child. This measure authorized parents to recover damages for mental pain and suffering for the death of an unborn child, which includes a fetus. This bill could have opened the door to civil lawsuits for damages against healthcare providers providing abortion care, friends and family members who supported a pregnant individual's efforts to obtain needed medical care. It also would allow any individual who impregnated another person to sue for wrongful death of a fetus. Yes, the father could sue the mother if she terminated the pregnancy. Fortunately, this provision of the bill was amended out after the sponsor acknowledged that she did not know that was an impact and effect of her own bill. But the slippery slope was already engaged. This measure normalized and attached rights to a fertilized egg, an embryo, a fetus. Then, of course, along comes the Alabama Supreme Court and played out the extreme of giving rights to fertilized eggs via in vitro fertilization, or IVF. The probability of eggs being damaged and dying is tremendously great in this process, and medical providers simply halted their services immediately after the Alabama Supreme Court decision, sending prospective parents into a frenzy and created a state of fear among healthcare practitioners, providers, and service companies. The wind was quickly taken out of this issue and it died. Now, I want to end my comments this evening, much as I began them, talking about supermajorities. I've been engaged in legislative affairs for decades, as was mentioned at the beginning of this session. This legislative session represents my 45th consecutive legislative session. I was recently asked to describe the overall differences in the current supermajority and the pre-1990 supermajority. I went to work in the Florida Senate in 1979. There were only 6 Republicans in the Florida Senate at that time. So I worked during a Democratic supermajority for the entirety of my 16 years. So I want to talk about the differences in the 2 supermajorities. Now, there have always been acts of greed and selfishness and skirmishes, and in the old days, there were downright fistfights in the chamber. But the earlier supermajorities at least knew they were a separate but equal branch of government, and they flexed that independence. But there were certain values that guided the implementation of legislation. There was respect for individual liberty, women's rights, civil rights, human rights. There was belief in scientific inquiry. There was honor in acknowledging the separation of church and state. There was focus on creating a safe, secure, world-class public education system. There was respect for freedom of speech. There was a genuine effort toward racial equality. There was an awareness of due process, concern for the environment, and hope for continued democracy. And they did not fly the American flag upside down. The earlier supermajorities, in fact, created the culture that the current supermajority is warring against. And that war will continue to persist until we adequately educate the public and people to believe that there is actual power in their vote. And that work must be done now, right now. So I end in the words of Martin Luther King Jr. If not now,
When?
and if not you,
Mhm.
then thank you so much for allowing me to make these comments. I hope that I inspired someone to do something, and let's get our folks out voting. And again, I am willing to answer or attempt to answer any questions that you may have.
Great, thank you so much, Pamela. I'm going to turn it over now to Joy Burgess from Indivisible Mandarin to facilitate some Q&A. And I know there's going to be a lot of questions rave reviews from the crowd. Thank you so much. So Joy, if you'll take over the Q&A.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Carol. Pamela, you were amazing. Thank you so much for going through all of this in such a clear and inspiring way. Until I see questions in the chat, which I don't see now, I have a few questions I'm going to start with. And I thought I'd ask you the one that I ask everyone, so bear with me. I was in Tallahassee a couple of months ago when there was this big rally about the Harry and Harriet B. Moore legislation. It was beautiful. But I thought to myself, this legislation was so impactful. What can we do as citizens before the next session, before committee meetings are held, to influence our own legislators to pay attention to this legislation that's good for everybody? So is that so unrealistic? And give us something we can do, because it's too good to just let it die for years and years.
Absolutely. It is going to take a monumental effort to lift this bill up. There's just no question about that. I do want to say we were able to, I think I mentioned that Senator Thompson and Representative LaVon Bracy Davis filed the bill. We were able to get every Democrat to co-sponsor this bill. And as easy as that might sound,
Yeah.
wasn't quite so easy, but we have every Democrat on this bill. I would ask members to gain access to copies of this bill, hold forums in your own community, roundtable discussions about what's in this bill, why it's in this bill, and explain the power of their vote. I would ask all of you, wherever you are, to reach out to your own elected officials and tell them this is an important bill. You need to co-sign this bill, and you need to push in the legislature for this bill to be agendaed and fairly heard. That is what is needed to get this bill moving. And we're going to file it every year until we can get it heard. We're not going to change anything in the state of Florida unless and until we change the people who are pushing buttons in the chambers.
Thank you. So those of us that live in Republican counties, and I do, and my legislator is, both of them are Republican, I should be just as forceful with them as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you for saying that. Yeah. So there's a comment in the chat from LJ Holloway. It's not a question though, it's just reinforcing what you were saying about the legislation. Well, let me ask another question, because I don't see a question in the chat. So you mentioned your last comments were, what can we do to educate our voters that their vote is powerful and their power is in that vote? That's easier said than done, so I really appreciate that. So my question is, the last thing I read, there are nearly 900,000 more registered Republican voters than Democrat. So I'm trying to figure out why is that, since they are subjected to the same egregious voting legislation that we are. So why are so many registered Republicans out there, and we are lagging so far behind when we led in this regard in the state, as you suggested?
Well, let's keep in mind that we are a transient state. And so we have a lot of people coming from other places who are already registered Republicans. We also have, over the years, heightened what's known as list maintenance through the Supervisor of Elections office. It's now every year we have to engage in what's known as list maintenance, meaning that supervisors must review their voter rolls and remove people who are deceased, people who have not voted in the last 2 general elections. And regrettably, there are a lot of people who may vote one time and they don't vote again.
Yeah.
We have to have continuous year-round aggressive voter registration, because what we do know through analyses is that a newly registered individual will vote at least that first time. So you have to have a newly registered voter to replace that old registered voter that only voted one time. 2 years ago.
Yeah.
We have not been as aggressive and as continuous on the ground with voting. Now, let me say, since 2018, when the Amendment 4 passed, giving returning citizens the right to vote, the legislature has been aggressively suppressing our vote.
Yeah.
Every legislative session, they invite Jim Crow to return to the state of Florida. Now, we know the big secret is that Jim Crow never left the South,
Yeah.
always been around, but they are openly suppressing the vote. In 2023, the legislature passed Senate Bill 7050, which greatly restricted the ability of third-party voter registration organizations to register voters. They increased fines that at one time had been $1,000 up to $50,000, and now the fines are up to $250,000, and there are criminal acts attached to what might be a simple mistake. So
Yeah.
we have our large, dedicated third-party voter registration organizations not putting their workers and potential voters at risk by engaging in voter registration as third-party voter registration organizations. As the organization, they could give you the voter registration form and collect that form. They were then responsible for reviewing it and submitting it to the correct supervisor of elections office. Today, with the excessive fines and the potential for criminal penalties, the only thing we can do is use technology. You can register people using your phone, using their phone, using iPads or computers, or you can give paper. Now, when you hand someone that paper, what
Yeah.
you have is a lot of hope that the form, one, will be completed, two, will be completed correctly, and three, that it'll get mailed to the correct voter registration office.
Supervisor election. Yeah.
So we have to find creative ways to do that. We're asking people to host forums in their towns and invite the supervisor of elections office to participate with you. You can have as many of those forums as they will show up and help with.
Yeah.
And many organizations are hosting these events. When the supervisor can't participate with them, they stage and set up near postal drop boxes. They have envelopes,
Wow.
they have stamps, and they encourage people to fill out the form there at the table, put it in the envelope, and drop it right there in the box. That's effort, that's work,
Yeah.
but that's what we're having to do. So we're inviting people to host forums. And what we found over the last few years is that whereas these suppressive measures by the legislature are certainly hurting voting and gaining access to the ballot box, it's also hurting supervisors of elections. By and large, many of them want to administer a free and fair elections. And they are finding that these laws are just making their job unduly difficult.
Yeah.
They realize themselves that they are not allowing access to the ballot box. And this year, I think we're losing more seasoned supervisors than I've seen at any given time. Many of them are, quote, retiring and just deciding not to run again. That's not helpful to the system, that we're losing so much knowledge, and a lot of them are being appointed. And what we're seeing is the individuals being appointed have had virtually none, zero, zilch exposure and knowledge about the process of voting. So we're expecting chaos for a variety of reasons at our polling locations this time.
Yes. Thank
Joy, I wanted to make
you.
sure you
I
saw
see
the,
there's a,
messages in the
I
chat. Okay,
saw a
thank you.
question. Yes. Um, I don't want to skip over, okay. I see a question from Elizabeth Sams that says, "We're so grateful for your years of advocacy and your presentation tonight. Many of us worked on the amendment that restored voting rights to felons who served their time, and only to see the legislator impose the fees and fines." I'm trying to get to the question, Elizabeth. Now we're dealing with Measure 4 to restore the rights of women. What can we expect in the way of legislative undercutting this time? So
Well,
since we had it with the returning citizens, they came back. And so what can we expect with this Amendment 4?
we can expect the legislature to attempt to do something. Now, we spent an enormous amount of time writing this language, this summary, and this language for Amendment 4. I've been involved in the process of writing ballot summaries and language for many years. I don't know that there was an effort that was so diligent and so intense as we did with Amendment 4. Now, I am someone who worked on the privacy language that was currently in our uh, Constitution. My constitutional law professor, Professor Patricia Dorr, is known as the mother of privacy. She is no longer with us, but she was the one that wrote and pushed the language, the privacy amendment that is currently in our, until recently was in our Constitution. So this was very, very personal to me. So we've written this language as tight as we could, with the understanding that we're trying to keep the legislature out of it. So we're not so sure that they will come in. Of course, you can't do anything to the language itself, but we are certain that we will see some practice manipulation in the medical practice field that may have an impact on this. You already know that the Board of Medicine, the Health Department, and ACA have created rules already to deal with the current 6-week ban.
Yeah.
So we anticipate that there will be combinations of rules and combinations of practice activity that might have some impact. But we have written that language as tight as we could. So we are anticipating, many years of litigation. Today, in fact, in circuit court here in Leon County, there was almost an all-day proceeding that will impact the fiscal note that is attached to the ballot language. That ballot language was written during the time when the 15-week ban was in play. We didn't know whether the court was going to sanction the 15-week ban, and of course, that triggered the 6-week ban. So
Yeah.
it's now deemed obsolete, and we did have a proceeding on that today. But we're looking at more years of litigation as it relates to Amendment 4, and with Amendment 3, which legalizes
Marijuana.
recreational marijuana, there is a bit of an understanding that the legislature will and should come in to set some parameters around the use of recreational marijuana. What you're hearing now from some camps is, oh, the state of Florida will simply smell like a trash can, that people will just be walking up and down the street smoking recreational marijuana. We probably won't see that happening, because the legislature is likely to impose restrictions on where and when you can actually smoke this marijuana. So there probably won't be as much of a pushback against that as you may see impacting Amendment 4.
Yeah, thank you. This question comes from Linnell Philman. She's from the League of Women Voters here in Jacksonville. How do we help everyone better understand that violation of home rule is bad for every municipality? We should also be able to govern based on the needs and resources of local communities. and not from rules from Tallahassee?
Well, we almost have no home rule and we almost have no local rules. The legislature has been, for the last 4 years, very aggressive in usurping local authority, preemptions on virtually everything. I think the last big push was the county commission term limits this year. And for the first time in quite some time, we had so many county commissioners in mass coming to the legislature. Their, excuse me, their focus, of course, was the one bill providing term limits. But while they were there, they did get quite an opportunity to talk to legislators about their ability to govern at home. It's going to take the legislature really understanding what is government. It is really
Yeah.
true. Government is best by the people. And this legislature is just, this majority legislature is just arrogant enough to believe that they know best about every little thing. So it's going to take a lot of communications. It's going to again take people in their local communities talking to their own elected legislative representatives and senators about this issue. And there's not enough of that going on. I encourage citizens to always get together, 3, 4 of you at a time, and schedule appointments to go in and actually meet with your elected representative or senator in their office at home. Yes, you can come to Tallahassee to see them, but
Yeah.
that's a whole different mindset. It's different when they're at home because they live among people in their communities. And so if there is a process, if there could be a process, and I'm a planner, I love plans. So I love for people to say, okay, you four go on Monday and you four go on Wednesday, and we'll show up on Friday. And then we'll get a whole nother group to start the next week. It's going to take effort to get this information through to our legislators.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. This one is from Judy Shecklin, who's a member of the Jacksonville National Organization for Women. And she says, since the passage of bills supporting universal vouchers and expansion of charter school funding, public school funding throughout the state has been gutted because of the statewide concerns. Do you have any suggestions as to how we can organize our state around this?
Um, Universal vouchers is devastating our public education system. Um, I'm I don't have a whole lot of confidence that it's going to really be the world-class process that we have worked so hard to build. This other supermajority built for us, because we know public education is the great equalizer. Everybody can gain access to public education. We have fantastic teachers. We have fantastic processes. And now you can't have books in your classroom. You can't teach correct history. Uh, they tried to monitor the pronouns that you use and that you apply to other people. Vouchers can easily bankrupt our school. And what
Yeah.
we're seeing is the combination of business. Businesses are going to have to get involved in a very different way, or we're not going to have the educated workforce to sustain those businesses. And that's where I think the rub comes. You all may remember during way back during the Lawton Childs administration, he had a keen focus on developing programs that impacted children up through the age of 3, because that is the greatest brain development years. The Council of 100 is a ad hoc group. It's made up of the top 100 CEOs in the state of Florida. and they are advisors to our governors. Lawton Childs worked with the Council of 100 during his years to develop all of these programs. That helped us get to pre-K. We have pre-K, we have 4 pre-K. All of those programs were to get children, young children, ready for kindergarten. And the more readiness they had for kindergarten, the better they did in school. And the better they did in school made them better workers. And I'm not
Yeah.
necessarily talking about minimum wage workers, but they were better workers. They got themselves into college. But it's all about the education process and what the workforce looks like. There were businesses, there probably still are businesses that are not interested in moving to Florida because we don't have an educated workforce that can handle the technology, the research, and other things that that business could offer. Yes, we're a tourist destination. And yes, we are a service-oriented state, but in order to sustain the economy and the economic balance in Florida, you want a variety of businesses here. You don't always want just minimum wage, service-oriented businesses. So in order to be attractive to major technology businesses and research forums and institutions, we have to have a workforce. And they're not going to gain all that education in voucher schools. I
Yeah.
assure you of that.
Yeah. Thank you. Now, there is a comment, I think it's a question from Teresa Gamble, and she says this Project 2025 playbook is being used to fuel legislation, and how can we halt such efforts? And I'm assuming, Ms. Gamble, you're talking about the Heritage Foundation Project 25 policies to support a Trump presidency. So
Oh,
that's a,
Project 2025
yeah,
is very much in play in the state of Florida. Florida is an incubator for conservative ideas and for conservative bills passing. If they pass in Florida, you will see them in Arkansas and Arizona and Texas. So Project 2025 is definitely at play. And again, conservatives have been planning. They have been preparing and planning since 1992. I have worked in every redistricting in the state of Florida since 1982. In 1992, you might recall that that was the year that the Republican Party came into Florida and consorted with some of our Black elected officials in the legislature. And they said, look, we can draw these districts in a way that you can get more Black representatives and senators into the legislature. And the legislature may look more like Florida. And they went for it. But what happened is when you draw all of these small urban core districts, you also bleach out the rest of Florida. And the rest of Florida became largely conservative and Republican. But they planned. Project 2025 didn't just appear this year. It's been in play and it's been working for years and years and years. They just renamed the project and shuffle some of the elements of it, but they plan, and as well as they plan, they also execute.
Yeah.
We don't have any plans. We sort of move from election cycle to election cycle, but we don't have any long-standing, sustaining plans that we can activate in multiple communities at the same time. And that's what we need to get to. We don't have a war room with consistency in it. People who worked in redistricting in 1992 that created plans for the Republicans are still engaged and working for Republicans to this very day. We throw our babies out with the bathwater every cycle.
yeah, yeah. So I just want to expand on that just a little bit. As scary as that project is, and I've started to read it, and it's scaring the crap out of me personally. But we have so many other things to educate our voters. Is this something that's worth using as part of the narrative that the 2025, if it gets in place, it would be disastrous to all of us? Or should we just not bother with it and deal with the normal things we do to educate our voters to get to the polls?
Well, I think we have to shock people. I
Yeah.
think we're in that place now where we have to take their fingers and stick it into the socket and say, this is what is going to happen to you. It's coming. It's coming for you, and it's coming for you now. So you're going to have to explain what that project is, what it's doing, what it's going to bring to our state, what it's going to do to us personally and our families, what we won't have access to, what we won't be able to do. We have to shock people now. I don't think just really asking people politely to go to the polls is going to work for us any longer.
So we need to make that part of our narrative.
Yes,
That makes
absolutely.
sense.
Absolutely.
So there was a lot going on this legislative session as well on healthcare related things, particularly in building up the workforce. Certainly those of us that are in the healthcare environment wanted Medicaid expansion and scratching our heads as to why we're only one in 10 states that haven't expanded Medicaid. So help us a little bit understand, how do we approach this legislation again? Because they did stuff, but nothing related to expanding Medicaid.
Well, we've been trying to expand Medicaid for over a decade. We
Yeah.
just, again, we have to be consistent at it. There are some pieces out there that could be helpful to get us to that place. It's been difficult for some of our legislators to connect the dots on separate bills that would be helpful to building upon convincing the legislature to expand Medicaid. I'm going to sort of dedicate myself a little differently this next session in expanding on some of those small bills that would be helpful to getting the legislature to understanding the need for Medicaid. It is going to take effort. Part of what happens is, the legislature turns over. We have new people every year, term limits
Yeah.
take place. So we are always re-educating. So again, it's just the consistency of what we do. We have so much to combat against that sometimes we get lax on other important measures. So stepping up to the plate on Medicaid is definitely something we all have to do.
So I see states that did not expand Medicaid see rises in the Affordable Care enrollment, a gift to insurance industry. Yeah. Well, I see a note to me to wrap it up, but I'm going to ask you a question that's dear to my heart. I'm terrified by the increase in maternal mortality for Black women. Black women are scared to get pregnant because they don't know if they're going to survive pregnancy. How can we help our legislators to see that this is a crisis for all women, but Black women in particular? What do we do there? Because it really is of concern, certainly in Duval County.
Well, it's very much tied to what's happening with abortion.
Yeah.
We have a legislature that simply is not focused on maternal care, abortion care. They don't see it as health care. It's only going to get worse if we are not successful with Amendment 4. I see a lot of harm coming to women, particularly Black women, in this abortion arena. We are losing healthcare professionals. They are leaving the state because of the great risk of liability. When you do get a physician, when you are in a healthcare facility, so often the conversation is not even going to be about you and your healthcare. It's going to be about the liability of the healthcare provider and the hospital you have to be in. So nobody's going to always be acting in your best interest. They'll be
Can
acting
you,
best
can you-
interest of the
yeah.
hospital and the doctor. And oftentimes that means you won't get care.
Yeah. Would you mind just closing out for us with something to help us move forward? Because all of us are fighting to save this democracy. As blemished as it is, we want to keep it and make it better. So give us some parting words, and we really appreciate you being here tonight. And thank you so much. So we'll close, give you the last word.
Well, actually, Joy, I don't know if I can come up with anything better than how I closed out my comments.
Well, we'll accept that.
We have to talk about getting people to understand the power of that vote. And we have to do that now. And it's going to take every one of us. And if we don't do it now, then when are we going to do it? And if it's not every one of you, then who will that be?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. You lead very nicely into the next part of our work, which is this collaborative work that we've been doing here in Duval County. But on behalf of the Indivisible Mandarin and Beaches Activist Movement and everybody here that's representing different organizations, thank you so much for your service. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. And I don't know better everybody else. Let's give her some sort of thank you in any way you can. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. So I'm
Thank
gonna
you.
thank you.
I'm going
So I'm
to
gonna
bid myself goodbye.
have a good one. Thank you so much. I'm gonna send it back over to Miss Brady.
Okay, thank you, Joy, and thank you again, Pamela, for a great presentation. Kudos. If you just hang with us for about 5 minutes, we have a few announcements and want to bring you up to date on some of the activities that we're doing. This joint webinar with BAM and Indivisible Mandarin is part of an Indivisible Grow Grant that we received. So we're very excited to be doing that. But there are a number of other components, one of which we just finished up, which was the Joyful Resistance Together We Win, Get Out the Vote Summit. And all I can say is our partnership between BAM, Indivisible Mandarin, Indivisible Jacks Riverside, as well as the work with the Northside Coalition in Florida for All, created really a wonderful summit that speaks a lot to what Pam was talking about, trying to get organized and build coalitions to really get out the vote and do that important voter education and engagement. The summit was held May 8th. We had 52 participants from 29 community organizations, and the work focused on 3 breakout groups, one with Black and Hispanic voters, young voters, and voters who signed the petition, both on abortion and legalization of marijuana. And we're excited to report that we have a follow-up meeting scheduled with the folks that step forward to lead and collaborate on efforts to get out the vote with each of these groups on June 18th, and want to recognize Indivisible Mandarin for their work in coordinating and organizing that follow-up meeting. Here's a few great pictures from it. We had lots of hard work, lots of good energy in the room. We've just compiled the summit evaluation results, and everyone, I think, agreed that the summit was very successful in meeting people's expectations as well as the objectives that we set out. So again, congratulations to everybody that was involved in planning and recruiting the great speakers and organizing it. I put a link here to the summit proceedings. Again, we'll distribute these slides and post them through our group so you can check out what actually happened and the recommendations that came out. And we'll be doing a presentation to the Indivisible group in Florida on June 25th. So I'm sure we'll communicate information about how you can tune into that. The other thing that we're doing jointly is a voter guide, an online voter guide. I put up our websites. Please check them out. There's lots of information there, and certainly come back and look at the voter education material and the voter guide that will be posted and updated as qualification ends and as the elections get closer. A few activities that are coming up of interest to all of us. We wanted to make sure everybody was aware of the nonpartisan voter education and get out the vote outreach around the school board elections. We have a number of seats up for election this year, and a lot of candidates, including Moms for Liberty candidates. And so the Families for Strong Public Schools and Public Education Defenders have prioritized getting out the vote in districts 3 and 7. They're going to be focusing on left-leaning independents to make sure, because again, the school board elections are held as part of the primary, and there's a lot of independents who we definitely need to turn out who think it's a primary. I can't vote on anything. So this is nonpartisan education to make sure independents know they can vote, and the importance of the races in these districts in particular, where we need to make sure that Moms for Liberty doesn't take over the majority of the school board. So the outreach canvassing starts June 22nd. Check that out. We're also involved with a new indivisible project called Neighbor to Neighbor. Nancy, who you met earlier, is coordinating that effort for us. This is a relationship-based canvassing. You get the names of 10 neighbors. They're like-minded neighbors. So it's very small, very different than cold canvassing in large districts. It's a great complement to the canvassing that we're all familiar with. So their use of it in other areas shows that, in fact, the turnout is it's much more effective. They can demonstrate that than some of the other get out the vote strategies. The Peace March is this Friday under the Fuller Warren Bridge, the Northside Riverwalk. This is a peace march to end gun violence, sponsored by many of our partners, including Moms Demand Action, Northside Coalition, and a number of other groups.
Carol, one quick thing. It's at 6:30, not 7:30.
Oh, sorry, did I put the wrong time on there?
Yeah.
Okay, God,
Okay.
this is not my, thank you, Jean.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I'm gonna tell everybody to show up after it's over. 6:30. I will correct that before we send it out. Thank you,
All right.
Jean. Thank you. It is not my night. Oh, my goodness. Rachel Grage, our candidate at the beach for State Representative District 16. She's running against Cayenne Michael. And somebody, I believe, wrote in the chat that, in fact, many of the terrible bills that were introduced and passed in many cases were co-sponsored by our current state representative, Representative Michaels. So we have a great candidate, Rachel Grage. Come out and support her and learn more about her campaign. We'd love to have you for her kickoff on June 12th. And finally, June is Pride Month. We all have known, I think, read in the paper about the State Department of Education, largely under the governor's direction, we're sure, not allowing us or any place else that lit up the bridges for Pride Months to do that this time. So the organizers of the Pride Parade this year have picked the Acosta Bridge to host their Pride March on June 29th. We also have placed a list of activities in Duval and the 4 surrounding areas in our drive, and I will again share that with the slides. That's it. Thank you all. And again, I apologize for any of the confusion in signing on. I have no excuse except it was right after the summit. I was brain dead. But thank you, Joy. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, everyone, for attending. And most of all, thanks to Individual and BAM for working together on this joint project. And good night.